Welcome to Environmental Intelligence Episode 30. It's May 1st, 2026. Friday briefing. Let's cover what matters before the weekend. Ontario's ban on green rules for developers may raise retrofit costs and slow climate adaptation for extreme weather. Alberta's policy on oil and gas payments to ranchers on public land raises new questions around liability allocation for environmental remediation. Canada stands to benefit from a $200 billion clean energy expansion if regulatory approvals can be accelerated. BC is progressing several major projects in renewables and critical minerals through First Nations partnerships. Professionals should examine how these shifts affect permitting and site management workflows this week. Ontario has banned green rules for developers, reversing municipal efforts to mandate climate-resilient building standards. Municipalities across the province have invested millions in preparing buildings for extreme weather events. This change could slow progress on climate preparation and increase overall costs for retrofits and new construction. For environmental professionals working on building projects in Ontario, this means reduced requirements for green infrastructure in development approvals, potentially affecting how climate risks are integrated into site plans. Watch for any legal challenges or provincial guidance on how existing environmental standards will interact with this ban. Implementation will likely influence ongoing and future development projects immediately. In Alberta, the government now permits windfall oil and gas payments to ranchers leasing public land. The policy creates a complicated dynamic where unpaid amounts may shift costs to taxpayers. Environmental consultants should consider how this affects liability for site contamination and reclamation on these leased properties. This arrangement may require closer scrutiny of reclamation security during site assessments. Practitioners will need to factor in these payment structures when assessing reclamation responsibilities. In British Columbia, major projects including wind, solar, LNG, and critical minerals are advancing across the province. These initiatives all involve First Nations partnership. This development signals expanded opportunities for environmental assessments and compliance work on these initiatives. If your firm handles environmental assessments, these projects could generate new work in the coming months. In Quebec, Montreal's policies on vacant buildings are reportedly keeping some properties vacant and vulnerable to repeated fires. A local family questions whether a demolition permit after the first fire could have prevented the second incident. Practitioners in Quebec should review how these municipal rules impact environmental site assessments during urban redevelopment. This could affect how you approach contaminated sites in urban renewal projects. The interaction between vacancy rules and assessment requirements deserves close attention in redevelopment planning. The race to mine critical minerals for artificial intelligence and clean energy is creating sacrifice zones that harm water and health of the world's poor. This highlights the importance of thorough water quality monitoring and risk assessment in mining projects to avoid long-term environmental damage. Canadian projects in this sector should prioritize these protections from the outset. 2026 is on track to be the warmest year on record. There is evidence that climate sensitivity is 4 to 5 degrees Celsius for doubled carbon dioxide rather than the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 3-degree estimate. This accelerated warming rate has implications for updating climate models used in Canadian environmental risk assessments and adaptation planning. Professionals using these models in site-specific risk assessments may need to adjust for higher sensitivity values. Canada is positioned for a $200 billion clean energy boom, according to a recent report. Faster approvals are required to realize this potential. This presents opportunities for environmental consulting firms to support project development in renewables and critical minerals while navigating approval processes. Firms should prepare for increased demand in these areas. In British Columbia, individuals with environmental drilling experience are considering paths into heating, ventilation, and air conditioning work in the Lower Mainland. They are weighing British Columbia Institute of Technology programs against immediate helper positions. This reflects broader demand for skilled trades in energy efficiency and building systems that intersect with environmental compliance projects. Those with site assessment backgrounds may find transferable skills in this growing sector. Now, speaking of the Alberta oil and gas payments on public land, here's something I wish someone had told me early in my career. You arrive at a ranch site in Alberta where an oil and gas installation operates on a public grazing lease. The rancher receives payments from the operator, but recent policy shifts allow for significant windfall benefits if production is high. The environmental assessment reveals potential soil and groundwater impacts from historical operations, raising questions about who bears the cost of any required remediation. Under Alberta's land management and environmental frameworks, the operator typically holds primary responsibility for contamination. Lease arrangements can complicate recovery if the company defaults. Experienced practitioners recognize that public land leases often include reclamation security requirements. Enforcement can lag when taxpayer funds are involved in backstopping unpaid obligations. The key insight is to review the specific lease terms and any associated environmental bonds early in the project to identify all potentially responsible parties. The most common mistake is treating the rancher as the sole contact for site issues. Instead, direct inquiries to the provincial authority overseeing the lease and the operating company to ensure proper allocation of remediation duties. If you are working on building and retrofit projects in Ontario, review the details of the ban on green rules for developers and assess impacts. If you handle oil and gas operations on public lands in Alberta, examine the liability implications following the new payment policy. Update timelines and strategies for clean energy project approvals based on the recent report recommendations. Monitor British Columbia major project announcements for new environmental assessment opportunities. Consider how Montreal's vacant building policies affect redevelopment and site assessment practices in Quebec. Monitor for any provincial responses or clarifications on the Ontario Green Rules ban and its interaction with environmental standards. Track developments from the Clean Energy Approvals Report for potential policy changes affecting project permitting. Review updates on Alberta grazing lease policies for any new guidance on environmental compliance. Watch British Columbia government channels for additional details on advancing major projects and associated regulatory requirements. Tomorrow, watch for updates on how the $200 billion clean energy expansion might influence approval processes in multiple provinces. That covers today's environmental intelligence. If you found this useful, share it with a colleague who needs to stay current. We're back tomorrow morning. This podcast is curated by Patrick, but generated using AI voice synthesis of my voice using ElevenLabs. The primary reason to do this is I unfortunately don't have the time to be consistent with generating all the content and wanted to focus on creating consistent and regular episodes for all the themes that I enjoy, and I hope others do as well.